today's video, we are going to jump into heartbreaking moments where mothers were eaten alive by predators in front of their family, from a mother who made herself a distraction to keep her children safe, to another mother who was attacked on a vacation in the deep blue water. But first, let's jump into the story where a mother was a few steps away from safety until she was suddenly dragged underwater. It was March 3rd, 2013. The Atchafalaya Basin had not fully decided whether winter was over. The air sat warm and damp in the way that Louisiana air does in early March. Not quite spring, not quite anything, just thick and still, and pressing down on everything beneath it. The water was the color of weak coffee, flat and unbroken in every direction. Cypress knees broke the surface in clusters along the banks. Liza Fernandez was 35, a mother from a small town outside Baton Rouge, who had grown up fishing these waterways. She knew the basin the way people know familiar roads, well enough to stop paying close attention. She and her husband had brought their young son out that morning for a routine fishing trip, the kind of outing the family had repeated a dozen times without incident. The boat was small, the gear was simple, the plan was to be home before lunch. They had been on the water for a couple of hours by the time anything changed. The morning had been easy, the kind of slow, quiet fishing trip where the conversation drifts and the time passes without anyone noticing. Their son sat between them. The water around the boat was calm and gave nothing away. It never does in the Atchafalaya. That is not a comfort. That is just how it works. Then suddenly, the son slipped. One moment he was in the boat, and the next he was in the water beside it, the splash loud and sudden in the quiet of the bayou. Both Liza and her husband went in without hesitation, both of them reaching for the boy at the same time. The water was shallow near the boat, waist deep, maybe less, but the bottom dropped off sharply just a few feet out, the way bayou floors do without warning, soft silt giving way to deeper pockets that don't show on the surface. Her husband pushed the boy up to the gunwale. The child grabbed the edge and was pulled aboard. For a moment, it looked like it was going to be fine. What none of them had considered, what there had been no reason to consider until right now, was what 15 seconds of frantic splashing sounds like to everything else in that water. American alligators are ambush predators that can remain completely motionless beneath the surface for hours. They are acutely sensitive to surface disturbance. Sudden, frantic movement in the water does not register to them as a person in trouble. It registers as prey. The response it triggers is not a decision. It is a reflex, and it is immediate. Whether the animal had been holding position in one of those deeper pockets nearby, or had closed the distance faster than anyone could track, it didn't matter. By the time Liza was the only one still in the water, something had already made up its mind. Liza was still in the water, a few feet from the hull, moving toward it. She was reaching for the side of the boat when the surface beside her simply stopped being flat. The alligator surged upward from the drop-off and clamped onto her left leg just below the knee, the bite immediate and total, the jaws locking with a force that pulled her sideways and off balance before she could process what had happened. She went under the first time fast, the animal using its full body weight to drag her toward the deeper water, away from the boat and away from anything solid. Her husband lunged over the side, reaching for her arm, his fingers closing on nothing. She came back up once, her upper body breaking the surface, her mouth open, one arm extended toward the boat. The alligator had not released. It adjusted its grip and began the roll, the full lateral rotation that alligators use to disorient and drown prey, spinning her away from the hull in a violent arc that churned the water white. Her husband shouted her name. The roll pulled her under again, deeper this time, into the drop-off where the water went dark. She did not come back up. The water went still. Her husband got his son to shore and called for help from the bank. Emergency responders arrived within the hour and began searching the area. Liza Fernandez was recovered the following morning, located downstream from where the attack had occurred, consistent with how the basin moves things in the hours after dark. A large alligator was identified in the area by wildlife officials, who noted in their report that the sequence of events had created conditions that made an attack not just possible, but likely. In the months that followed, Liza's husband sold the house outside Baton Rouge. He could not drive past the road that led to the boat launch without pulling over. He relocated with his son to his sister's home in northern Louisiana, 200 miles from the nearest bayou, and did not return to the Atchafalaya Basin. The family had fished that bayou a dozen times. They had never had a reason to think about it differently. On March 3rd, 2013, they did. The bayou that took Liza Fernandez was a place she had been 100 times before. Liza never saw it coming, but the next victim did. She saw it clearly from 15 feet away, and she stepped toward it anyway. The day was July 19, 2016. The trail moved through mixed pine and aspen forest in the foothills west of Colorado Springs, the kind of terrain that looks approachable from the trailhead, and quietly becomes something wilder the further in you go. It was mid-afternoon. The light came through the canopy in long, broken columns. The air was dry and warm, and the forest on either side of the trail was dense enough that visibility into the undergrowth dropped to 10 or 15 feet before it became shadow and brush and nothing else. Elena Navarro was 36, a physical therapist from Colorado Springs, who hiked regularly and brought her 2 young sons along on trails she knew well. She was not reckless. She kept her children close. She had walked this particular trail multiple times without incident, and nothing about the afternoon suggested that this time would be any different. It was a weekend. The boys were out of school. It was the kind of ordinary afternoon that families in Colorado spend outdoors without thinking twice about it. They had been on the trail for about 40 minutes when the forest changed, not dramatically, not in any way that would register as a warning to most people. The birds had gone quiet. The undergrowth on the left side of the trail had stopped moving in the light breeze that had been pushing through it. Small things, the kind of things you notice only if you are already looking for them. The boys had drifted ahead, not far, maybe 20 feet, moving faster than Elena on a slight downhill stretch, the way kids do when the trail opens up a little. That gap, small as it was the condition the animal had been waiting for. They were moving along a straight section of trail when all 3 of them saw it at the same time. The mountain lion was crouched low in the brush to the left, partially concealed, watching them. It had not been visible a moment before. It was visible now because it had stopped caring whether it was. It was looking directly at the boys ahead, its body low and absolutely still. Elena closed the distance to her sons immediately, stepping in front of them, raising her arms and shouting. She told them to stay behind her and not to run. Mountain lions are the largest wildcats in North America, with adult males reaching up to 8 feet from nose to tail and weighing up to 220 pounds. They are ambush hunters, built to close distance in silence and target the back of the neck. They are significantly more likely to engage when a target is small or isolated. This animal, wildlife officials would later determine, was a young male that had been sighted near residential trailheads in the area on several occasions in the months prior, close enough to people, often enough, that it had stopped treating them as a reason to leave. Elena's response was correct. The problem was the animal she was responding to. A habituated lion does not reliably retreat from noise and posturing the way a wild one does. It has learned slowly and over time that humans are not a threat. It does not unlearn that in the middle of an encounter. The lion did not retreat. It shifted position slowly, circling to the left, lowering its body again, adjusting its angle without breaking its focus. Elena kept backing away, kept shouting, kept herself between the animal and her children. The attack came from behind and above. The lion had used its circling to reposition into the brush at Elena's back, and it came off an elevated section of the slope without warning. It struck her between the shoulder blades with its full body weight, driving her face first into the ground. The impact was immediate and total. Before she could push herself up, the lion had repositioned to the back of her neck, its jaws closing on the base of her skull and upper neck, the precise targeting that mountain lions use on prey, applied with the same mechanical efficiency. She continued to shout for her sons to run, even as she went down, her voice carrying down the trail. After a brief hesitation, both boys turned and fled. Elena Navarro died from her injuries before emergency responders reached her location. Authorities confirmed the mountain lion responsible and tracked it in the days that followed. The animal was a young male, with several prior sightings reported near the trailhead in the months before the attack. The official report noted that Elena's actions had almost certainly redirected the animal's focus away from her children. Both boys were found on the trail by other hikers approximately a quarter mile from the attack site. Elena's 2 sons were placed in the care of their father, who had been separated from Elena for 2 years prior to her death. He moved the family out of Colorado Springs within 6 months, relocating to a suburb of Denver, where nothing looked like a trailhead and nothing looked like a forest. The trail was temporarily closed following the incident. It reopened the following spring. Elena Navarro died on a trail she had walked before, in a moment she never saw coming from behind. The next death was slower. It unfolded in a yard, in full daylight, with the victim's family watching from inside the house, close enough to see every second of it, and completely unable to stop any of it. The morning of October 2nd, 2017 had come in cold and overcast over the rural property outside Glacier, the sky sitting low and flat the way it does in northwestern Montana when the season is turning and the mountains have already made up their mind about it. The grass in the yard was still wet from overnight rain, the tree line pressed close on 3 sides of the property, the forest beginning no more than 40 yards from the back of the house. It was the kind of place where wildlife was not a surprise. It was simply part of the landscape, and the Whitaker family had learned to read it the way you learn to read anything you live alongside long enough. Dana Whitaker was 39, a veterinary technician who had lived on the property with her husband and 2 children for 6 years. The area sat at the edge of established grizzly range. Wildlife officials had documented increased grizzly movement through the region that year, animals pushing further into lower elevations as the season shifted and food sources changed. Black bears were common on the property. A grizzly was a different matter, and Dana knew it. She kept the trash secured. She knew what to do if something large came out of the forest. She was not naive about where she lived. She was experienced in the specific, practical way that people who live adjacent to wilderness tend to be, which is to say, she understood the risks well enough to manage them, right up until the moment the risk she was managing turned out to be something else entirely. The morning had been ordinary. Her husband was inside with the kids. Dana had been moving between the house and the outbuilding, doing the kind of routine weekend work that fills up a Saturday morning on a rural property. The dog had been calm all morning. Then, sometime around 9, it wasn't. The barking started at the edge of the yard, not the ordinary kind, but the sustained, low, aggressive kind that means the dog has found something and has decided it is a threat. Dana and her husband both moved to the window. Near the tree line, roughly 40 yards out, a large grizzly stood facing the yard, watching the dog strain against its lead. What neither of them could see from the window was the brush directly behind the bear. 2 cubs were positioned in the undergrowth, close to the tree line, partially hidden. The mother had placed herself between the yard and her cubs. That was the geometry of the situation. Nobody inside the house knew it yet. The dog broke free. Grizzly bears are not predatory toward humans by default, but a female with cubs operates under a completely different set of rules. The maternal defensive response is not a warning. It is not a bluff. It is an immediate, committed charge toward anything perceived as a threat to her offspring. Adult females typically weigh between 250 and 450 pounds and can cover ground at up to 35 miles per hour. The distance between a grizzly at full speed and a person 40 yards away collapses in under 4 seconds. Dana went out after the dog immediately, moving fast across the wet grass, calling it back, closing the distance between herself and the bear. From inside the house, her husband and children watched through the window. The dog ran directly toward the cubs. The moment Dana crossed into the space between the dog and the cubs, shouting, moving quickly, closing distance from the opposite direction, the situation reclassified itself completely. She was not approaching a bear near a tree line. She was approaching a mother bear that had just watched a dog run toward her cubs. And now, a shouting human was closing in from the other side. The grizzly moved. There was no prolonged warning display. A brief surge forward, weight shifting, and then the charge fully committed. She crossed the 40 yards in seconds, low and fast across the wet grass, and hit Dana with the full force of her body weight. The impact drove Dana off her feet and into the ground, hard enough to be visible from the house window. The bear followed her down, one forepaw pinning her to the wet grass, and delivered a single bite to the upper back and shoulder. The deep, crushing bite that grizzlies use in defensive attacks, designed to neutralize a threat as quickly as possible. Dana tried to curl inward to protect her neck and abdomen the way every piece of bear safety literature instructs. The bear struck again at the back of her head. Her husband had reached the door by then. He shouted from the porch. The bear looked up, assessed him across the yard, and then turned and moved back toward the tree line, her cubs falling in behind her. Dana Whitaker did not get up. Emergency responders arrived within 20 minutes. Dana Whitaker was pronounced dead at the scene. Wildlife officials confirmed the bear's behavior was consistent with maternal defensive aggression and noted that grizzly activity in the area had been elevated in the weeks prior, with several reports of animals moving through lower elevations than usual for that time of year. The cubs, invisible from the house, had been the critical factor, the variable that turned a manageable situation into a fatal one before anyone inside had any way of knowing it existed. Dana's husband did not leave the property. That was the part that surprised people who knew him. He stayed in the house, kept the kids in the same school, kept the same routines, and told a neighbor months later that leaving felt like abandoning the last place she had been. The dog recovered from its injuries over several weeks. It never went near the tree line again. Dana Whitaker died 40 yards from her own back door. The next death happened on open water, in full view of the people who loved her most. It was August 8th, 2014. The water off the northern California coast was running cold and gray-green, the surface deceptively calm, the kind of flat ocean that looks safe from a boat and tells you nothing about what is happening below it. The sky was overcast, The swells were low. Visibility beneath the surface dropped sharply within a few feet of depth. The water thick with particulate from the seasonal upwelling that pulls cold, nutrient-dense water toward the surface along that stretch of coastline. From the boat, you could see maybe 3 feet down before the water became a wall of gray-green nothing. Rachel Kim was 42, a marketing consultant from the Bay Area, who had been taking her family on annual coastal trips for years. She was a competent recreational swimmer, comfortable in open water, and had no history of recklessness around the ocean. She and her husband and teenage daughter had anchored their small rented boat roughly a quarter-mile offshore and had been swimming near the hull for the better part of an hour, something they had done on previous trips along that same stretch of coast, close enough to the boat to feel secure, far enough from shore that the water had depth and cold to it. Nothing about the morning had given any of them a reason to think about it differently. Her husband climbed back into the boat first. Her daughter followed. Rachel was still in the water, a few feet from the hull, treading water, preparing to follow them up. Her husband leaned over the side to help her. Her daughter watched from the stern. It was the kind of moment that lasts a few seconds and then is over. The last person out of the water, the trip wrapping up, nothing left to do but climb the ladder. The stretch of coastline they were anchored off sits within one of the highest density great white shark habitats in the world. The population is sustained by the large colonies of elephant seals and sea lions that breed along that coast, and the sharks that feed on them have learned to hunt in exactly the kind of water Rachel Kim was floating in. Cold, murky, low-visibility water, where a human swimmer viewed from below produces a silhouette and a movement pattern that is not meaningfully different from a seal. Great white sharks are the largest predatory fish on Earth, commonly reaching 15 to 20 feet in length and weighing up to 4,000 pounds. They hunt from below. They do not announce themselves. The strike came from directly underneath her. The shark drove upward with enough force to send water exploding around her on impact. Her husband and daughter both heard it before they fully understood what they were seeing, a concussive, wet impact that snapped the quiet of the morning in half. Rachel was hit from below with enough force to partially clear the surface, her body twisting sideways as the shark's momentum carried through. The jaws had closed on her lower torso, the bite catastrophic in both force and placement, and as the shark descended back into the dark water, it took her with it, pulling her under in a single downward arc. Her husband reached over the side, his arm fully extended, his hand cutting the surface. She was already beyond reach. The shark released and came back. The second passed lateral this time, driving her further from the boat, the water around her going dark. Rachel was visible at the surface for a moment, one arm up, reaching toward the hull, and then the water closed over her, and she was gone. Rescue efforts began immediately. A nearby vessel responded to the distress call and assisted in the search. Rachel Kim was recovered after a short search and pronounced dead at the scene. The coroner's report noted injuries consistent with a large upward strike and subsequent engagement with catastrophic damage to the torso. Authorities noted that the combination of low visibility, the presence of marine mammals in the area, and the time of day were all consistent with conditions that significantly elevate great white shark activity along that stretch of coastline. Rachel's husband and daughter were treated for shock at a local hospital and released the same day, which, by any clinical measure, was far too soon. Her husband stopped working within 3 months of the incident, unable to maintain the concentration his job required. Rachel's daughter, 16 at the time, refused to return to the coast entirely and rerouted her college search years later to exclude any school within 50 miles of the ocean. The boat rental company was contacted by investigators and cooperated fully. No charges were filed. Rachel Kim was pulled under in seconds, in open water. The next death happened indoors. In an enclosure the victim had built herself, with animals she had raised for years, in a facility she knew better than anyone, a controlled environment, right up until the moment she walked into it alone. Back on May 11th, 2015, the afternoon heat in the Texas Hill Country had pushed past 90 degrees and settled there, the kind of dry, pressing heat that radiates off concrete and corrugated metal and makes the air above the ground shimmer at the edges. The property sat outside a small town west of San Antonio, a single-story house with a converted outbuilding set back from it, connected by a short gravel path. From the road, the outbuilding looked like a workshop. Inside, it was climate-controlled, purpose-built, and meticulously organized. Enclosures lined the walls, temperature gauges, feeding logs, the kind of facility that takes years to build correctly and reflects the person who built it. Marissa Velarde was 34, a reptile breeder who had worked with exotic animals privately for over a decade. In Texas, Large constrictors fall into a regulatory gray area, legal to own in most counties with minimal formal oversight, the rules varying enough from one jurisdiction to the next that experienced keepers largely self-governed. Marissa was one of them. She had handled large constrictors hundreds of times. Her children had grown up around the facility and were familiar with its routines. She was not careless in the general sense of the word. She was experienced, knowledgeable, and had a safety record that reflected both of those things. What she had also developed over years of uneventful handling was a tolerance for risk that had quietly outpaced her caution, the kind of drift that happens in small increments, each one feeling reasonable at the time, none of them feeling like the last step before something goes wrong. The morning had been routine. She had checked temperatures, updated feeding logs, and moved through the facility the way she always did, methodically, without rushing. Her children had been in and out of the outbuilding throughout the day, watching from doorways the way they always did, familiar enough with the animals to be comfortable and young enough to not fully understand what comfortable around these animals actually meant. By early afternoon, she was down to the last enclosure on her list. The snake was a reticulated python she had owned for 9 years, 16 feet long, well-fed, and that afternoon, alert, its head raised, actively tracking her movement before she had even opened the enclosure door. Marissa noted it and went in anyway. She did not bring a hook tool. She did not call for a second handler. Her children were visible through the doorway to the adjacent room. Reticulated pythons are the longest snakes in the world, with large individuals exceeding 20 feet and 200 pounds. They kill by constriction, anchoring a bite and coiling around the target, tightening incrementally with each exhale until breathing becomes impossible. The pressure a large python generates is sufficient to fracture ribs. They are not aggressive by default, but they are not domesticated animals. Handlers in private reptile circles widely recognize that any snake over 8 feet requires 2 people present during direct contact. Not for beginners, for everyone. The python struck without any of the hesitation that 9 years of handling might suggest it had learned. It anchored a bite on her right forearm, the strike fast and precise. The teeth curved inward so that pulling away only deepened the hold, and in the same motion began to coil. The first loop came around her arm and upper torso before she had fully registered the bite. The second followed within seconds, the snake's body moving with a speed and deliberateness that experienced handlers describe as the moment the situation stops being recoverable. Marissa called for help immediately, her voice controlled, instructing her children to go get someone. Her older child turned and ran toward the house. Her younger one stayed in the doorway and did not move, watching. The coils tightened. A reticulated python does not squeeze continuously. It tightens incrementally, taking up slack with each exhale, each breath slightly shallower than the last, the space inside the coils decreasing with a patience that has nothing to do with patience and everything to do with physics. By the third exhale, the compression on her chest was measurable. By the fifth, it was the only thing that mattered. Marissa kept calling out, shorter words now, tighter, each one harder to push out than the last. Her voice changed in a way that had nothing to do with panic and everything to do with the simple mechanical fact of her chest having less room than it had a moment before. The younger child stood in the doorway and watched her mother's face change color. Then it stopped. Emergency responders arrived and removed the snake. Marissa Velarde was pronounced dead at the scene. Her older child had reached a neighbor 2 properties down. The call to emergency services was made from that neighbor's phone. Her case was subsequently referenced in reptile handling circles and private keeper training materials as an example of what solo handling of a large constrictor looks like when it goes wrong. The failures identified were consistent and unambiguous. A snake of that size, handled alone, without tools, in an active behavioral state. Each factor individually increases risk. Together, they produced an outcome that experienced handlers, when asked about it, tended to describe the same way: foreseeable. The facility was closed. The animals were transferred to a private sanctuary 3 hours north of the property. Marissa's 2 children were taken in by her sister, who lived in Austin. The outbuilding sat empty for the rest of that summer. The climate control kept running, holding the temperature exactly where Marissa had always kept it, for weeks after there was no longer any reason to.